Good morning. It is 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, May the 12th, 2021. We want to welcome you to the Dallas Independent School District STEM Environmental Education Center for our virtual field trip. Sorry you can't be here in person, but that will happen soon in the future, maybe. A very special welcome to our friends at Walnut Hill. You guys have really had a rough time. Lost your school, you just picked up and moved to another school though and kept right on, didn't miss a step. I was over there. And then you went through the pandemic and here you are still going. Thank you for your effort. All right. You teachers, if you're watching and you have not registered, go to www.tiny.cc/EEC register, sign up. This is just for our attendance record. The program this morning will be taxonomic groups. During this virtual field trip, students will understand that all organisms are composed of one or more cells, identify the basic characteristics of organisms, including prokaryotic or eukaryotic, unicellular or multicellular, autotrophic or heterotrophic, and mode of reproduction, that further classify them in the currently recognized kingdoms. Mr. Monroe will talk about organisms are composed of cells. Ms. Fuller will discuss prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms. Ms. Nash will tell you all about domains, and Ms. Ramirez will discuss kingdoms. You cannot, students, you cannot ask us verbal questions during this program, but you can go to www.tiny.cc/EEC, space question, space answer, and send us in your questions pertaining to this program. We'll be glad to answer them for you. If I don't have time to answer them during the program, I will send the answers to your teacher and they can discuss them with you. Now I am going to stop sharing my screen and Mr. Monroe is going to tell you all about organisms are composed of cells.
Good morning, students. My name is Mr. Monroe, and we're going to be investigating organisms which are made up of cells. Now, you know, out here at the Environmental Ed Center, we have a lot of ecology-based programs that students come out and participate in. And we're studying about the environment or studying about ecosystems, and that ecosystem can be split up into two components, the abiotic side and the biotic side. Now, abiotic is a reference to things that are non-living. In the biotic side are the living factors, or the living things, the organisms. And we know the big difference, the great big difference between a non-living organism, abiotic, and a living organism, which is biotic, is the fact that living things, things that are alive, are made up of cells, okay? Now, as I go through my presentation, I want you to be thinking about a couple of questions. Well, one question and then maybe a scenario that your teacher just might give you to make sure that you're understanding the difference between the different types of cells and the difference between living and non-living. The first question is this. I'm thinking that your teacher, if your teacher hasn't already done this, they're going to probably want you to name or identify one unicellular organism, or maybe several, I don't know. The other question or scenario that your teacher may present to you wanting an answer from you might be this. Supposedly a scientist is using a microscope and he views an unknown substance and he discovers that that sample is made up of cells. Would that sample be considered to be abiotic or biotic? And then that teacher just might want you to justify your answer. Well, students, listen. We know that living things, the basic unit of life, are cells. And there are animal cells, which here's a diagram of an animal cell or a model of an animal cell. And there's what we call the plant cell. Now those cells are there to allow that organism to go through what we call life processes. So those cells have specific jobs to do. Within the cell, even though these cells are very tiny, you'd have to use a powerful microscope to see them. Within the cell, there are what we call organelles. And those organelles have, again, a specific job or purpose that they're there for. And to help you kind of get a better understanding of that, I'm going to go through a short PowerPoint, okay? So bear with me as we go through this. I'll share my screen with you. Levels of organization. What this means is we're going to be looking at the levels of organization of cells in an organism. Life is organized into different levels based upon size, from small, you might even say tiny, to large. Organisms and cells. Here we have an image of a unicellular organism and a multicellular organism. And I'll let you guys figure out which is which. Some organisms are what we call unicellular. That means, or this means, they are made up of only a single cell, which is responsible for carrying out all the life processes of that organism. Perfect examples of this is bacteria and yeast. Some organisms are multicellular. This means they are made up of many cells. And those cells, guess what? Again, there's a lot of them, and they're to carry out certain purposes or functions to help that organism go through life processes. Perfect examples would be humans, and on the plant side, trees. Unicellular organisms have nothing but a single cell, as represented here in that image that you see. However, multicellular organisms have many more levels of organization to make sure the whole body can work correctly, even when it's doing many things at the same time. Organization in multicellular organisms. Starting with the cell, which is the basic unit of life, the same type of cells make the same type of tissue. The same type of tissues make the same type of organs. And those same organs, those same type of organs that perform a certain function will make up an organ system. And that completes it and making an organism. The cell. Again, the cell is the basic unit of life. Cells are specialized by size and shape for the job that they do. The paramecium above is made of only one cell, and it must perform all the jobs of that organism. The jobs that actually help that organism go through what we call life processes. Here we have a skin cell. Now, one thing about the cells that they do have in common, whether it's a plant or animal cell, they do have what we call a nucleus, okay? And then the other organelles that are found there, guess what? They have specific jobs that they do. That is a skin cell, guys. Now, human body tissues. Human body tissues exist, and they are made up of different cells: connective tissue, skeletal or muscle, epithelial tissue, nervous tissue, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle. With those tissues, the same type of cells are making up those tissues, those tissues are helping whatever organ they're found in to do a specific job to help that body function the way it's supposed to function. Again, tissues are made up of the same type of cells. They're grouped together to do a specific job. Humans have those 4 kinds of tissues: epithelial, muscle, connective, and nerve. Organs. Organs are made up of different tissues that work together to do a job. In this image, you see the heart. That is a perfect example of an organ. Organ systems. An organ system is a group of organs working together to do a function. Human organ systems include the circulatory, the reproductive, the digestive, the nervous, and the respiratory system. Plant organ systems are made up of an organ system called the roots, the stems, the leaves, and the transport system. Remember, the same type of tissue makes up that organ, the same type of cells make up the tissue, and that is what we call levels of organization. All cells, tissue, organs, and organ systems working together makes an organism. For example, the human organism. And we are a perfect example of all 5 of those levels of organization as far as cells are concerned. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I have an animal here I want to talk about those levels of organization in him. This is Hoppy the bullfrog. And of course, we know that he has a unique skin. And this skin does serve a purpose with him. It serves a purpose, it protects him. And it also serves a purpose of being able to go through what we call gas exchanges. And it works in concert with his respiratory system. You see, having that 3-chambered heart, his lungs don't produce enough or can't produce enough oxygen to keep him alive. So his skin is made up of material, tissues, that allow it, as it's wet, to pull in oxygen from the air. So that's where he gets an amount of oxygen that helps him survive. Okay, so his lungs are giving him oxygen, and his skin is permeable, so it can absorb air and go through the gas exchange to give him oxygen. So you can see how the skin tissue is working, a specific type of skin tissue made up of certain types of cells is able to help him go through his gas exchange. Now, internally, he's got that heart, which is considered to be cardiac muscle. So the same type of tissues exist there that would be muscle type tissue. And those tissues are made up of certain cells that would be muscular type. And probably his legs have muscular type tissue also, because this guy can jump quite a ways. The legs are quite muscular. But I just wanted to share that with you. And I'm going to put him up right now because I think I've about run out of time. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Gorman so that if any of you have any questions, he might be able to answer those for you. You guys have a good day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Monroe. And a question that came in said, Mr. Monroe spent a lot of time talking about the cell. Cell this, the cell that, unicell, multicell. Now, who invented the word or who named the cell? Okay, the origin of the word cell. In the 1660s, Robert Hooke looked through a primitive microscope at a thinly cut piece of cork. He saw a series of walled boxes that reminded him of the tiny rooms or the cellula occupied by monks in the monasteries. Apparently their rooms were much like prison cells, one little square box right after the other one. So he named it the cell. Mr. Robert Hooke, 1660. Now thank you again, Mr. Monroe. And now let's let Ms. Fuller tell us about prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms.
Good morning, boys and girls. My name is Mrs. Fuller. I'm talking to you from Lab 502 at the Environmental Center. This is my lab assistant. His name is Peanut. Peanut is a leopard gecko. I want you to see his sweet face. He is a reptile, and as such, he is a eukaryote, which means that his cells have a membrane around the nucleus, and his cells also have organelles like the Golgi apparatus, the mitochondria, and those sort of things. I'm going to set him down because he really does not like being held. And I'm going to show you one other thing before we start our slide presentation. We're going to be talking about what are in cells, both prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And the prokaryote has one chromosome and the DNA is in a loop, just like this string. I'm going to hold it back here so you can see. And it's not in a nucleus with a cell membrane, with a membrane around it, not a cell membrane, but a membrane. This loop of DNA is all piled up like this and put in a place in the cell of the prokaryote. It's called a nucleoid, but it's not a nucleus. So I just wanted you to see that they've only got one chromosome and it's all piled up like this. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. And we're going to look at a little PowerPoint about prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And let me present the screen. All right, so prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Bacteria, that's the prokaryotes, and other organisms, fungi, invertebrates, vertebrates, plants, all those guys, protists, all those guys. So if you look at the bottom, you've got our prokaryotes over on the left, the bacteria, and then we've got two pictures of a plant cell and an animal cell. So now let's keep these essential questions in our mind as we go about it. How does the cell of the prokaryote differ from the cell of the eukaryote? And name two prokaryotes and two eukaryotes. So at the bottom, we've got bacteria over on the left. We've got a mushroom, a fungi. We've got a crayfish, which is a crustacean, the hand of a mammal, namely us. And then we have green plants over on the far right. So what's a prokaryote? Pro means before. Karyote is a Greek word that means kernel or nut. So the name indicates the type of cell that predates the cells that have a membrane around the nucleus and organelles within. Two types of prokaryotes exist, bacteria and archaea. The DNA of these organisms are in a loop, like I just showed you with a string, which is found within the cell in a tangled, messy pile. So over on the left is a picture of archaea, and keep in mind it does not have chloroplast. It's been stained, that's why it's green color. And then we've got three bacteria. We've got the rod-shaped bacteria that cause tuberculosis. We've got the sphere-shaped bacteria that causes a staph infection. And then over on the left, we have a spirochete, which is a very interesting type of bacteria. This particular one causes leptospirosis, which you do not want. It will cause your kidneys to shut down. Now let's talk about archaea for a second. Some archaea can live in extremely hot or chemically dense environments. These kinds of archaea are called extremophiles. Archaea are not harmful to people. They can live on your skin, and you mostly see them on people in the mid-years, like between 17 and maybe 49 or 50, something like that, especially on people who have dry skin. And they also live in your gut, and the gut archaea can form methane, which is a greenhouse gas. And this occurs in about 30% of people. And the function of archaea is called methanogenesis, which means the beginning of methane. And it can leave your body either through your mouth or through flatulence. So those are both good things to know. Now let's talk about prokaryotes. no nucleus, no organelles. They don't have a membrane enclosed nucleus. They have one chromosome, which is a single continuous strand of DNA, and it's in the portion of the cell called the nucleoid. And there's a drawing of it. Now, the next one we're going to look at are the eukaryotes, and those are everything that's not a bacteria or an archaea. And U means well or good, and karyote, once again, kernel or nut. And the eukaryotic cell membrane-bound nucleus has a membrane-bound nucleus and organelles. And the organelles are things like the Golgi bodies, mitochondria, vacuoles, chloroplast, you know, all that stuff that we find in cells of animals and plants. Any organism that is not bacteria or archaea is a eukaryote. This would include all the things I just said. So here are some models of those different cells. We've got a plant cell, an animal cell, and a fungi cell. So here is a research challenge for you. For a research challenge, construct a model of a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell. Be sure to label the parts. You can use any manner of things to make these up. You can use food. I've seen fruit salads made to look like cells. Play-Doh. Play-Doh is probably the easiest. Clay, or even plastic toys that you find at home. Have fun learning about cells. So these are two little drawings that'll show you a very easy way to construct using materials found at home. One type of model of the cell that was very clever, someone took a mason jar and filled it with clear gelatin, like Knox gelatin, and then floated different kinds of food in it that were shaped like ribosomes, the nucleus, the Golgi apparatus, that sort of thing. So use your imagination and show it to your teacher, and I'm sure your teacher will be quite amazed at what you've done. Now, let me stop sharing my screen with you, and let me stop sharing. There, so we're back. And if you have any questions about the bacteria and archaea, the prokaryotes or the eukaryotes, everybody else, Dr. Gorman will be more than happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you for joining me on this little journey, and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fuller. And the question is, are we humans prokaryotic or eukaryotic? Now, Ms. Fuller covered several different things. One of them she said was that vertebrates are eukaryotic. And the last time I checked, I do have a backbone. So yes, humans are eukaryotic. Thank you very much again, Ms. Fuller. And now we're going to let Ms. Nash present a program called Domains.
Hello, welcome to my classroom. So today we're talking about domains. So when I went to school many years ago, there were 5 kingdoms, and then there were 6 kingdoms. And now, instead of, well, there's still 6 kingdoms, but now there are also 3 domains, a higher category than the kingdom. So let's look at where that idea came from and whose idea it was. Let's show some pictures here. So it's not too long ago, in 1990, a man named Carl Weiser decided that the kingdom system was not good enough, that there were a bigger category. There were 3 big categories that he called domains. And they are, as Mrs. Fuller just went over for you, the bacteria is one, that bacteria and the archaea used to be together. And now they're considered two different domains. And the reason he decided this was so, he argued this on the basis of their RNA genes, that they arose separately. Down here, the tree of life has many branches, but all started from one point, and that they diverged, very, very early in the history of life on the planet. So now we have these three domains, the bacteria, and then the archaea, and then of course the eukaryote that Mrs. Fuller talked about. So again, similarities and differences. We talked about that, the DNA and the cell membranes with Mrs. Fuller. So the bacteria, this domain is unicellular, prokaryotic, and they're all around us, in the air and skin. Some are going to make us sick, some don't, some are really helpful. They come in all kinds of really kind of cool little shapes, that can be seen under a microscope. And some are really useful, So if you like yogurt, like I do, that comes from a bacteria that changes that milk into yummy yogurt. Another really important thing that bacteria do that probably help all of us live, is that they help plants live by converting ammonia to nitrates. So it's a really important job. They also help in decomposition, that also helps plants survive. So they're really important for life. The archaea, though, to me are so interesting, so fascinating. So that word archaea, you might think of archaic, or ancient. In fact, that they call them ancient bacteria. And they're considered some of the oldest species of life on planet Earth. They have a diverse exotic metabolism that allow them to feed on inorganic matter, meaning things that are not alive. They're unicellular, prokaryotic, and they can be autotrophic, meaning they make their own food like a plant, or heterotrophic, meaning they consume something else like we do. They have asexual reproduction. The only easy way to distinguish them from regular bacteria is by the extreme environments in which they live. Some archaea live in hot springs and geysers like Yellowstone National Park, and these are called thermophiles. So that word thermophile means, so you see that root thermometer, right? So like thermometer, so it means heat, having to do with temperature, and phile means to like it. So they like heat. Others live in extremely salty environments like salt lakes, like the Great Salt Lake in Utah. And these are called halophiles. This is salt. And still others live in extremely acidic environments or in and around deep ocean bends. Here's some pictures of those kinds of places. So here's Yellowstone, with those geysers, and big hot springs and hot pools of water. Nothing else can live in there. You can't drink it. We better not go in it. We get all burned up. But this, what you see here, this is archaea living. Here's another hot spring. You can see the steam rising here. Here's some sulfuric, very high sulfur content water, very weird chemical composition where they can live. And here's the Great Salt Lake. Super salty, you can't drink it, but they can live there. And then really interesting is around in the deep ocean, these places called the vents, the deep ocean vents. They produce these big chimneys, you may have seen pictures of them. And in those environments, chemicals come out from the earth and heat. And these archaea can live there and they can start weird food chains. So we always said that the food chain starts with plants, but not all. Some of these really weird food chains can start in those deep ocean vents without plants, without sunlight. Okay? They can live down there. So pretty amazing, amazing organisms. Here's some pictures of them. And then of course we get to the eukaryotes and the big three. Okay? We got the protists, but the big three are the fungi, the animals, and the plants. And of course here's our adorable flying fox mama. Where's her flying foxlet? Her little pup here. There's fungi, there's decomposers, and of course our friends, the plants. So lots of interesting things to learn about. And the thing I think is interesting to think about is that the ARCHAEA can survive in places that we would think life could not survive. So as we explore Mars and the moons of Jupiter, we may very well find, again, some really weird forms of life that can survive under conditions that we could not. So it's interesting to think about. If you have any questions, you can ask Dr. Wilson.
A student asked for a good definition of domain. Domain is the highest taxonomic rank in the hierarchical biological classification system above the kingdom level. There are 3 domains in life, just like Ms. Nash has told you. Thank you, Ms. Nash. And now let's let Ms. Ramirez tell us about kingdoms.
Hello, my name is Ms. Ramirez, and in this segment, we're going to be learning about kingdoms. And we know that kingdoms are a subsection of the 3 domains. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and we'll take a look at a couple of essential questions. So the first question that you should be able to answer by the end of this presentation is how many kingdoms are there? And you should be able to name them. And the second question is, how are kingdom Plantae and Animalia similar, and how are they different? So keep those questions in mind as we go through the presentation. And just a quick little infographic so you can get a broad idea of what the 6 kingdoms are. The way that I remember the 6 kingdoms is by a super simple sentence or mnemonic, and that is almost every person forgets plants, animals. I know it doesn't really make sense, but you can think of your own mnemonics to help you guys remember those 6 kingdoms. So in this mnemonic, almost stands for archaea bacteria, every stands for eubacteria, person stands for protista, forget stands for fungi, plants, of course, stands for Plantae, and animal stands for Animalia. So if you can remember that super easy sentence, then you know your 6 kingdoms. And something that you guys can do to help you record the information you're going to be learning is you can create a little graphic organizer like this to help you document the information for each of these 6 kingdoms. We're going to be going over whether they are prokaryotes or eukaryotes, whether they are unicellular or multicellular, whether they are autotrophs or heterotrophs, and then we'll give you examples of each. So you can pause the video and create your own little graphic organizer to help you put down this information in. Now with Ms. Nash, she talked about the 3 domains. Now we're going to go further into the kingdoms that are in those domains. So in domain Archaea, we have kingdom Archaeobacteria, which is easy to remember. In domain bacteria, we have the kingdom Eubacteria, which is also easy to remember. And then with domain Eukaryota, that is where we have the most kingdoms. So in domain Eukaryota, we have kingdom Plantae, Animalia, fungi, and protista. So these are all your eukaryotes. So just a quick review of some vocabulary words, because you'll hear me say these a lot throughout the presentation. You learned with Mrs. Fuller that prokaryotes would be things like your bacteria and archaeobacteria. They have no nucleus and they have no membrane-bound organelles. On the other hand, we know that eukaryotes, remember those 4 other kingdoms, they do have membrane-bound organelles. Then we're going to be talking about unicellular. Those are organisms made of 1 cell, so they're usually your simple organisms. And then multicellular are organisms made of many cells. And then when we talk about the type of feeding, we have autotrophs, which in earlier grades you learned were called producers. So autotrophs or producers make their own food through photosynthesis. And then we have organisms that are heterotrophs. Heterotrophs cannot make their own food. Instead, they have to eat or consume other organisms for energy. So in earlier grades, you learned that another word for heterotroph is a consumer. And we are examples of heterotrophs or consumers because we have to eat other things for energy. So keep those vocabulary words in mind as we go through the presentation. And then here is a quick little video of some examples of organisms in some of the kingdoms that I found as I was walking through the Environmental Center. So since y'all can't be here today, take a moment to make some observations at some of the cool organisms that can be found out here at the center. Also be thinking about what kingdom they are in and how do we know that. So here we have a cool leopard frog. It's obviously an animal. It's in kingdom Animalia. It is eukaryotic and multicellular. Here we have a red-eared slider, also in kingdom Animalia. These guys are also heterotrophic. They eat other things for energy. We have some cool cattle egrets. Again, they are multicellular, eukaryotic, and they are heterotrophic. So they are searching for food to eat, mostly insects. There were lots of them that day. And then here we have an example from Kingdom Plantae. It's a dewberry plant. They are covered in thorns, but they have beautiful berries and flowers. And you can actually see some examples of Kingdom Animalia that are on the flowers. So we have a couple of little grasshopper nymphs. And then we also have our Indian paintbrush, which is an example of Kingdom Plantae and its beautiful flowers. We also have Kingdom Plantae with some grasses, but also on those grasses, we have what looks like foam or spit. So these are something cool. So it's actually from the spittle bug, and we know that a spittle bug is in Kingdom Animalia because insects are animals too. And what ends up happening is the spittle bug nymph, they will actually use their piercing mouth parts, inject the plant and then suck out those plant juices. And in the process, they are actually pumping bubbles. They're forming this foam-like substance. And that foam actually protects the nymph while it's feeding, but it also prevents that nymph from desiccation, which means it prevents it from its body from drying out. So if I were to disturb that foam and kind of dig through it, I would eventually find either one or several nymphs in there that are feeding on that plant. So the plants, again, are Kingdom Plantae, and then the spittlebug itself would be Kingdom Animalia. And it gets the name spittlebug because a lot of people think it looks like someone spit on those leaves, but it's not spit. Here we have Kingdom Fungi, which are pretty interesting. We have lots of cool fungi out here. So fungi are heterotrophs. They actually eat other things. They secrete a digestive enzyme into their food source that helps to break it down to smaller pieces so that the fungi can absorb it. Fungi have cell walls made of chitin, and again, they feed on that decaying matter. Now, fungi can be multicellular, like all these mushrooms that you were seeing, but fungi can also be unicellular if it's some yeast. So to review, Kingdom Animalia are multicellular. They are heterotrophic, meaning they have to eat other things. So whether they're eating plants, animals, or both. And then also in the video you saw, mixed in with some of those animals, you saw Kingdom Plantae as well. Kingdom Plantae are your autotrophs. They make their own food using photosynthesis. Kingdom Plantae has cell walls that contain cellulose, and they also contain chlorophyll, which is important for that photosynthesis to take place. So here again, we have the Plantae and Kingdom Animalia being represented. So that's just a quick review of some of those three main kingdoms there. So now we're going to go to our next kingdom, which is Kingdom Protista. This happens to be one of my favorites, and it also belongs to domain Eukaryota. So it is a eukaryote. It has cell walls of cellulose. Some have chloroplast. Now, this is a very diverse kingdom because some protists can be animal-like, some can be plant-like, some can be fungus-like. So that's why they might have different cell walls. And then most are unicellular, but some can be colonial, like this Volvox here, and then some can be multicellular. So again, very diverse. Some can be autotrophic, and then some can be heterotrophic. So this is kind of like that oddball kingdom there. Now, one of my favorite protists is Naegleria fowleri, and it's actually a brain-eating amoeba. So I like watching this show on TV called Monsters Inside Me, and they talk about all these cool protists and things that can affect people. And Naegleria fowleri is a heat-loving thermophilic protist found in warm, fresh water, and it can even be found here in Texas. So last year in September 2020, 8 Texas cities were under a do not use water order because this protist was actually found in Brazoria, Lake Jackson, and Freeport area. And unfortunately, a 6-year-old passed away from infection from this protist. Now, it is rather rare. Over the course of 10 years, there's only been 40 cases. So again, it is rare, but it is interesting to learn about these different protists that do exist. And then we're going to start jumping into our prokaryotes now. So here we are with eubacteria. They are prokaryotes. They have cell walls with peptidoglycan. They are unicellular, and some of them are autotrophs, and then some of them are heterotrophs. And one of my favorite examples from this kingdom is Yersinia pestis, and that is a gram-negative bacteria, and it was the cause of the bubonic plague. So back in the 1300s, more than 50,000 people in Paris actually passed away from this, and that was 1/3 of its population. And I had the opportunity to go visit those Paris catacombs, and it was pretty interesting to see all those skulls and bones and kind of learn the history behind those catacombs. And then here you can see an example of what some of the early doctors back then wore because they thought that that would prevent them from getting the plague. And so you can see they had this weird mask on with goggles, and at the tip of that mask, they actually had like cotton balls, and they would put aromatic like herbs and incense into the end of that little mask because they thought that those smells would prevent them from getting bubonic plague. Of course, now we know that's not true, but it is interesting to know and understand how medical history has progressed as well. So that's eubacteria. And then our next one is ARCHAEA bacteria. This is the other prokaryote. It has cell walls also with peptidoglycan. It is unicellular. And again, these guys can be autotrophic or heterotrophic. Typically, when we think of ARCHAEA bacteria, we think of organisms that live in those extreme environments, but oftentimes they can also be found in more normal or common places like soil, lakes, oceans, as Mrs. Fuller mentioned, on our body as well. So they kind of can be found everywhere. Again, we typically think of them as those extreme places because they are the more interesting ones to study. So here we have some examples of thermophiles, those heat lovers, haliophiles that can live in extreme salty conditions, the acidophiles that can live in acidic conditions, and as Mrs. Fuller was mentioning, the methanogens, the methane-making ARCHAEA bacteria. So this is a unique group as well. And then here's a quick review of those 6 kingdoms and their characteristics. Again, you can see that kingdom eubacteria and ARCHAEA bacteria are going to be the only ones that are prokaryotes. The rest of them are all going to be eukaryotic. And then I have a quick challenge for you guys. Take a look at the organisms on this slide and see if you can identify the kingdom for each of these organisms and justify your answers. So I provided you guys with scientific names for some of these so you can do your own research. I thought these were some of the more interesting organisms. So see if you can identify their kingdom. So I'm going to stop our screen share, and I have one last organism that I want to show you guys. It is a representative of kingdom Animalia. So he is a multicellular, he is heterotrophic. In fact, he's an omnivore, and he is a eukaryotic. So the way that I remember that is you all are eukaryotes. So just think of you. So that's how I group us. This is Spike. He's a bearded dragon. They're native to Australia. And of course, they get that name bearded because they have a pouch of skin underneath their chin. When they get scared or frustrated, they can inflate that pouch to make themselves look big and scary. So he is our representative from Kingdom Animalia. And that's all I have for you guys. We're going to give it back to Dr. Gorman to answer any questions.
You're muted.
But it didn't take. All right, thank you, Mr. Ramirez. A student wants us to describe kingdom. In biology, kingdom is a taxonomic rank that is composed of smaller groups called phyla or divisions in plants. Historically, kingdom is the highest taxonomic group or the most general taxon used in classifying organisms. Now I'm going to share my screen. During this virtual field trip, students understood that all organisms are composed of one or more cells and identified the basic characteristics of organisms, including prokaryotic or eukaryotic, unicellular or multicellular, autotrophic or heterotrophic, and mode of reproduction that further classified them in the currently recognized kingdoms. Mr. Monroe told you about organisms are composed of cells. Ms. Fuller discussed prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms. Ms. Nash covered domains, and Ms. Ramirez introduced you to kingdoms. Thank you, teachers. How did we do? If you would, go to www.tiny.cc/EEC feedback and fill out a short form and send it to us. We would appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I want you to have a great rest of the day and especially a great rest of your life. Thank you for joining us today.